Are you a new dungeon master and wondering which homebrew rules you can use at your table? Or maybe you've been DMing for a while and want to freshen things up a bit. Or maybe you're a player and just curious about some of the homebrew that other tables use. Well, if so, then this new episode of the Art of Character podcast may just be for you. I've got 10 homebrew rules for D&D that players actually love. I'm Chris. Welcome to the Art of Character Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where we explore all things D&D, focusing on the heart of the matter of the characters. Let's roll. In this episode, we're going to do 10 homebrew rules that players actually love, or as a DM, things that I've found most of my players like. So this won't work at every table. And remember, at the Art of Character, we believe most of this is an art, not so much a science. So if I introduce something at my table and it isn't working, I'm not afraid as a DM to say, all right, that's not working. We're going to change gears. We're not going to do that version of the rule anymore, or we're going to take that away for now. Maybe try something else new. Don't be afraid to admit a mistake as a DM. And so homebrew rules can be tricky. Some of them can be game breaking or even too restrictive on players. So I think these rules are things that my players enjoy that add just a little bit of flavor, a little bit of spice, make things just a little bit more interesting and aren't completely game breaking in either direction. So homebrew rule number 1 is allowing fumbles on natural ones. So it's already always a failure, no matter whether it's an attack or a savings throw. So fumbles, for me, work like this, usually in combat. And it's always relative to what's going on in the game. So let's say someone is shooting a bow, and they're shooting past friendlies to enemies, and they roll a natural one. So usually what I do then is have them roll as a hit against one of their friendlies' armor class, and maybe this strikes them in the leg or something like that. Anyway, this usually brings up some interesting dynamics between the party, and they usually love it, just occasionally anyway, taking a little bit of friendly fire from other players in the party. It can make things interesting, funny, and always a story to go back on. Hey, be careful shooting. Remember last time, you nipped me in the back a little bit, right? So remember to keep it fun. Don't punish too hard. I'm not going to take away their absolutely favorite magic item or weapon that's going to be gone or lost forever. I'm going to give them a chance to retrieve it again later. But some interesting or fun things to do. They might slip, they might fall, they might be prone, or they might do something that's funny in an attack and wind up, now they've hugged the bad guy on accident. Just any kind of flavor or any kind of flair to make the fumble be a little bit fun, a little more interesting for the entire party. So there are also critical fumble tables. There are some D100 tables. You roll a percentile dice, and every time there's a critical failure, the player also has to roll on that table. That's another way to do it. It can be fun, it can be interesting, but some of those critical failures are pretty punishing, so your mileage may vary. So number 2, nat 20s on skill checks, let that be heroic, especially if it's something that's possible. Now, let's say it isn't quite all the way up to the number they need for that skill check, but they rolled a natural 20. That is as high as they can possibly roll. Now, if they're attempting something that's impossible, they're trying to jump across a gap that's way too far, they're trying to fly, they absolutely can't fly, there's probably going to be a failure there. But if it is something that is possible, it isn't completely impossible for them to do, and there are things that are impossible that they won't quite ever be able to do. And some DMs will say, if it's impossible, don't roll for it, or why roll for it? Or as a DM, something I can do if it's impossible is say, your player would know that there's no way that they could possibly do that. They probably wouldn't even attempt it. I might let them know that, give them a little foreshadowing. If they still double down and say they want to attempt it, then they're going to get those consequences. But if it is possible, allow that nat 20 to be a heroic success and have them describe how they did it against all odds. Again, that's as high as they can possibly roll, the best roll they're going to get. So number 3 are group skill challenges. So this kind of relates to the previous one. If it's a really difficult thing, I might let them know, say, hey, you all know this is going to be pretty hard. Or I may just ask and say, does anyone want to help them out? This lock looks particularly tricky. Does anybody else in the party want to help? So maybe they're casting spells, or they say, I'm going to aid, or I'm going to assist. And then you give them, some additional bonuses, rolling with advantage, whatever they may need. So kind of these are group skill check challenges. These don't always apply, but every now and then it's just kind of fun when everybody joins in to push forward this big obstacle, to open this particularly tricky lock, to kind of deal with this really tricky or difficult trap, whatever it may be. Or maybe they're trying to get over some particularly high obstacle or a particularly long jump, and they're essentially going to run and throw this character, do everything they can to get them across or get them up and over, right? And I love this. It encourages cooperation, it's group play, it's fun for everyone, and all those bonuses should generally help them be successful. And then they feel successful as a party, right? It's kind of a cool moment. So number 4 is I'll ask the player to describe their skill check. It could be intimidation or persuasion. I'll say, well, what do you say? Or what do you do? Or let's say they're trying to do something that's difficult, climb something or jump over something. And I'll say, well, how do you do that? Or what does it look like? And if the description is really good, adds an element of role play or whatever they describe, I think that will add to the chance of success. Then I'll say, all right, go ahead and roll with advantage. Just as they're kind of getting immersed and adding a little bit extra to what they're doing, as long as it makes sense, roll with advantage. I love it, right? Number 5 is call it high or low. Let's say a player comes up with something out of left field. It doesn't quite meet rule of cool. You're not sure what to do. You're not sure what skill check it is. I'll just say call high or low and pick a dice. Usually it's a D20. If it's 11 or above, it's high. If it's 10 or below, it's low. Let's say they call high, they roll a 15. Whatever they're asking about, whatever they were trying to do, I just let it succeed. And it's just an easy way when you're not exactly sure what to do, but you think maybe a dice roll would be appropriate. Rule number 6 are having semi-conscious death saves. Rules as written, they're supposed to be unconscious and fighting for their life. Well, I have them be semi-conscious and fighting for their life. So they may be rolling around just a little bit. They're generally aware of their surroundings. They can hear voices. They're kind of tracking what's going on, and they're kind of drifting in and out. It brings a little bit of extra flavor, some role play. So when somebody comes over to save them, they may say something to them. There can be a little bit of interaction, a little bit of role play. They're on the verge of life or death. I feel it adds just a little bit of drama and just a little bit of flavor to the whole experience. So consider using that if it works at your table. Number 7 is also death save related. It's if you fail your 3rd death save and you're dead, you get one final heroic action right as that's happening. Now you're not going to run across the battlefield and give one final attack. Maybe right there in the ground as you're dying, you're able to say something. You're able to take some action that makes sense from being there on the ground and dying. Would you like to take a final action? Something that makes sense. So that character is going to die. That's it. They care about this character. They've been playing him for a while. What is your final action in death? Something you want to say, something heroic, some action that makes sense. I just give them that opportunity if they want to take it. All right, so rule number 8 is sundering your shield. So if a character has a shield and they take a critical hit, I make a rule that they can sunder their shield to basically absorb that critical hit. So that critical hit becomes a miss, they take no damage, but that shield is destroyed, it's gone. And the same thing is true for a magical shield. That magical shield is gone, it's destroyed, that's it. You absorb the full brunt of that critical hit. You were taking no damage, but your shield is gone. So anyway, just a little flavor, a little homebrew, something you can add to your game. It doesn't come up very often, but I find it's pretty epic when characters are able to use that. So rule number 9 is flanking rules. It's an optional rule, not really homebrew, but if your characters are really into combat, really into the tactics of combat, I say go ahead and give this a try. So if your characters, I say if they're attacking from the rear quadrant of the enemy, then they attack with advantage. Now this works both ways, so bad guys can now use flanking rules too. It's a little more to keep up with. It might slow down combat a little bit, but it can make things a little more interesting if your characters are really interested in combat. All right, so rule number 10 is to allow for lingering injuries or scars. So let's say a player takes a particularly brutal hit, and after they've healed up, you may ask them and say, hey, so there's a potential in healing up, you might have developed some kind of a scar. Does that sound cool? And they say, yeah. Say, all right, describe that scar. What's that scar going to be? You know, maybe a player loses an eye or something like that. Now, this isn't something I would force on a player. I would just let it be an option. Something, if they're interested, ask them about it. If they've taken a particularly brutal injury, been on the verge of life and death, maybe something like that. Are there any scars from this? You've just been burned. Now you've been healed back. Is there any evidence that you've been burned? Do you want that as part of your story? Do you want that as part of your character? And maybe I would ask the player that aside from the table, right? After a session or something like that. They come back, they've healed up, they've done a long rest, and maybe they describe that, hey, now they've got this burn on the side of their body from when they took this fireball blast that almost killed them, right? Leave it up to the players, give it as an option, a little homebrew twist you can add. But wait, there's more. I've got a bonus. So the bonus is to consider letting players' attunement slots progress with levels. And I say maybe considering going up to 4 attunement slots at level 5 or 6, and then maybe going up to 5 attunement slots at level 10 or 11 or something like that. I probably wouldn't go past 5 attunement slots, but as your characters start accumulating magic items and they can only attune to 3, now you can do rules as written, and just if you want to limit players, that's a perfectly fine way to go. But if your players keep accumulating magic items and you as a DM are able to scale combat accordingly, I say consider adding an extra attunement slot or 2. It's not going to be game breaking. All right, there you have it. 10 homebrew rules that players usually love. Consider adding these if you're a DM. But remember, your mileage may vary. So if I introduce something that my players don't love, I'll go ahead and withdraw it and say, all right, my mistake, and just be flexible and willing to change direction. We hope this gave you some inspiration for your games. As always, keep playing, keep dungeon mastering, and until next time, bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Art of Character. If you've made it this far, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing, or click below and join our Patreon or our Discord. You can also click below and get something from our merch store. Until next time.